Today on the Videomaker Podcast, Chris and I talk all about lenses. We talk about really what are the things that make lenses so dang expensive. A lot of newcomers to video try to buy their first lens, and they're just astonished that the range of prices between lenses of the same focal length can be so wide. So we go into all details about the speed of the lens, the sensor type it's made for, cinema versus still lenses, the zoom length, all that kind of stuff. Pretty interesting conversation if you're new to lenses. We talk about quite a bit here. As always, if you've been listening to the podcast and you enjoy it, we would love it if you went over to iTunes and gave us a 5-star review. It's really helpful for podcasts like ours. It gives us more visibility. Also, we're still running the survey. We would love to know basically how you found out about the podcast. So there is a link in the show notes. You can click that and take a very short survey. You should be done in 1 minute. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Videomaker Podcast. I'm Mike Wilhelm, and with me, as always, back in the studio, Chris Monlex, to my right.
From a safe distance, we're 6 feet apart. Actually used a 6-foot HDMI cable to measure between us, so it was in a very Videomaker style that we are separate.
The Videomaker style of not having a tape measure.
Yeah, that's kind of true.
So today is Thursday. We reopened the office on Monday. Videomaker's in a town that was one of the few counties that was allowed to reopen in California earlier than the rest. So everyone is sort of getting used to being back here. The mothership here, this is like the podcast setup. I don't know if we've mentioned the mothership on the podcast, have we?
I think in our the first one or two, when we explained how it all was, you got to kind of see it from behind, but it's a little modified today.
Yeah.
And I'm appreciating your bokeh a little bit more than my own today, but we'll get to bokeh later.
I guess, yeah, let's see. Both full frame cameras, right?
Yeah. One's got a cine lens. I don't know you're also very far away from your background, and I'm right on top of mine. So
yeah. So the setup here is a little bit different. Chris is in Nicole's spot, and the table is shifted away. So now normally when I would turn 50 degrees to my right, now I got to turn 60 degrees to my right because we got about a 1 foot gap. We were at 5 foot microphone to microphone distance, and now we're at the safe 6 foot distance.
Yeah, we might change it up. I might move the camera back further so I zoom in, and maybe we can get a little bit better looking depth of field. But for today, I actually am pretty happy that our colors look kind of alike. Mike's on a C200 with the cine lens, and I'm on the Panasonic Lumix S1 with a 24-105 photo lens f4.
Yeah, so it looks good because Chris came in here and checked all the settings that I had messed up and repaired them, and now we're in good shape.
Yeah, well, it was funny because I don't think it was bad because I think we got to the same spot, but we just did it different ways. And yours was mostly that it was on C-Log, and then you added a bunch of contrast in the camera, and I just put it back to normal video mode.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
Yeah. But I couldn't help you because I couldn't remember the menu worth at all. I'm like, is it? And then I get in the menu. I'm like, oh, it's right here. Yeah. It just takes actually being in it.
So maybe the news this week is that that Nicole has decided to leave Videomaker. She's going independent these days. So I don't know when the last time Nicole was on the podcast, but whatever it was her last time as a staff member. We'll miss her perspective on the show. She had a very in-depth and academic knowledge of the filmmaking process, which we will now sorely lack.
Yeah, and Nicole was very much the kind of counterbeat to everything I'd come up with, and she'd always have a good another angle to look at it from me, or the two of us could debate, and I always enjoyed that. So I'm gonna miss her just personally for that reason. But I don't think she's a big fan of even being on the podcast, to tell you the truth. So I think it's she's probably happy that that's not going to be in her future there. But a lot of other things she'll miss.
Well, I was going to say hopefully we'll have her back on as a guest.
Oh, we could do that.
But if she doesn't like it, then a different story, I guess, right?
I think it was more of a balance of time, right? So it was
that's true.
I don't really have that much. I'd love to do it, but if I don't have enough time to do it, right?
Yeah, so Nicole gave me a little hint at what she's going to be working on next, but I don't want to spill the beans. But I think it's something that actually our audience may find useful. So maybe at some point we can reveal what's happening there.
She's opening a website called Videomaker2.com. Somehow we're condoning it.
Yeah. So the topic for today is lenses. And man, I'm surprised we haven't had a full podcast about this before. We've talked about lenses before, just when we were talking about the news about, whatever lens is coming out. But never a dedicated podcast about, the technology of lenses broadly outside of any specific lens.
And as video shooters, we have a larger selection of lenses we get to use, or that were I guess a still photographer could use a cinema lens, but it would seem kind of silly for them to do that because the benefits for it are for filmmakers. But we started off shooting video on an interchangeable lens camera on the 5D Mark II. And that opened up the video world to being able to have interchangeable lenses in general. And for video shooters, it's always like none of the lenses, at least at the affordable space, are marketed for video shooters. So it's hard to choose what's best. What are the features that really you need as a video shooter, and what's worth paying for and what's just a gimmick. And there's a lot of that in just about any kind of technology. But for lenses, there's just so many to choose from. We have a buyer's guide, and if you're confused about what lenses to buy, it's a really good buyer's guide, but it's actually going to get a little bit deeper because we're going to go by lens mount and make offerings there, because if you have a Canon lens or a Canon camera, our recommendation for a Nikon lens isn't really going to be very helpful to you. So we're gonna make those a little more depth. But the thing is what's good for if you go to a photo site or something like that and you look at what they're suggesting for lenses, they're not keeping you guys in mind, because there's a lot of things that don't affect photographers the way they do for video shooters, like changing aperture across the throw of a lens. That's something that is problematic for video shooters, because if you want to do a zoom in and all of a sudden your exposure goes darker, that's an issue while you're shooting. Whereas a photographer, maybe they didn't need all of that image while they're getting to that next focal length. So the zoom isn't being used for the zoom, but rather multiple focal lengths at their fingertips. So, that change then goes, okay, I'm going to adjust my ISO or whatever you need to change for the new exposure. But for video shooters, that's a problem. And so that's, for me, always the first recommendation I always give anyone for buying a lens for video shooting is try to get a constant aperture across the full focal length of the lens. So that's easy to do with a prime, because there's only one focal length. But for a zoom lens, I'm being shot on a 24-105 f4. This happens to be a Lumix lens, or maybe it's Leica, but every manufacturer makes a 24-105. I think we have over here is the R-mount 24-105, still same thing, f4. I think every manufacturer makes one. It's really much the standard of lenses, and that's a great lens to start off with. That's a really good kit lens if you have for a camera, but a lot of the cheaper the camera, the more likely you're going to get that variable F number through the full focal range of the lens. And that is one of the biggest things that you're going to pay for, is that constant aperture.
Yeah, when I was first learning about lenses, I learned how to shoot video on, handheld camcorders.
So you're dealing with gain in iris.
Exactly. You don't think about the lens too much. Usually at the time when you're using a camcorder, you look at like the magnification level. Like you would get a lens that says 25x zoom. But that doesn't really tell you much about the focal length, or the full focal length spread, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So, as a young videographer getting into lenses, I found it to be quite confusing, when, you would go online and people would say, oh, you got to get a nifty 50 millimeter, and so I would go online and I would look up Canon 50 millimeter lenses, and I would see there was one there for, $95 and another one there for $1,100. And it's like, what is really the difference here between these two? And is the difference really worth $1,000?
Yeah, like if we're talking about the Canon, right? A nifty 50. I think they actually might be $150 now. I think they originally started as 50. I think they were around 100 when we were there. But they're a little bit more. And those are, just as cheap as you can get it, but it's an f1.8. F1.8 is a pretty fast glass. That means it's got a pretty wide aperture, so you can shoot with lower light, but it'll also give you a really shallow depth of field. The difference between that and the L series 50 millimeter from Canon is f1.2. That's not even a full stop, right? So like if you're getting do you need that stop? I would actually argue you might not need it in a lot of cases. I don't know what the stop is. I think it
actually might be more than one stop.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I guess at that point, because 2.1, I don't shoot that high of an aperture very much. But regardless, is that worth that extra money? And a lot of times, you're going from having an inch of focal area to like a centimeter now, just because of that lower F number. So it might not be worth it, right? But what you're getting is a lot of other things. So like the Nifty 50 is mostly plastic. It has it has fewer iris blades, and those iris blades affect the shape of the bokeh. So the more blades, the more round the bokeh, or bokeh. Depends on who you're talking to. I think it's bokeh is right, but I say bokeh. And those things play together, and so with a prime, it's actually really not terribly difficult to find lenses that work really great in primes, because they're all going to have a lower F number. Even a prime that's like say a really wide angle lens. Usually you don't find those as like F 1.8 or something like that. They're like a 2.8 or something like that. But even F 2.8 is it's a foot or so of depth of field, of area and focus, and that's still pretty good for most. I mean, really, how often are you needing that shallow depth of field?
Yeah, it's really, really difficult to work with, your camera when you're shooting in 1.2. Yes. By the way, it does look like 1.2 is a full stop. This chart that I'm looking at here has 1.4 to 1.8 is 2/3 of a stop. So it's a decent amount of light. But yeah, it's the depth of field is so shallow that even a subject that is not moving is difficult to keep in focus.
So when I first started shooting with the Canon 7D Mark I, I remember us when mirrorless cameras first started coming out, being like, okay, we have a Canon f1.2 50mm, and we're like, if we got a mirrorless camera with the speed booster, we could make that 0.9. And thinking, because the issue we had is we didn't have a lot of really nice professional lights. We didn't have it in abundance. So we were coming into situations that were not as lit as we'd like to, yet the natural lighting looked okay. We just needed a camera that was more sensitive. And at the time, the answer to that was just a faster lens, a lens that had a wider aperture so that you could actually get it and being exposed. But now with mirrorless cameras being more sensitive by 3 or more stops, we're not having that issue. Plus, at 0.9, you're really not getting a lot of benefit from that. That's like astrophotography glass. Is
that the Nikon?
The Noct one is a 0.9. Yeah,
right.
It's a 58mm 0.9 for their mirrorless, and that was like their big flex for their big giant mount they have. But so I didn't learn this until after, when I started needing to buy lenses for a full frame camera. I had a 24-70. I had the Canon f 1.4 50mm, and I thought that was a great setup for my 7D. And I thought I was shooting at 50mm. I thought I was shooting 24-70, somewhere in there. But we'd get in a small room and like, man, 24 should be wide, and this doesn't seem all that wide. Well, there's a thing called a crop factor. So if you're not familiar with the crop factor, it's the size of the sensor when compared to the size of a a full frame sensor. Full frame sensor is based off of what 35mm film was. So that full frame really affects that multiplier. So the multiplier is really the size difference. So the difference between the APS-C and a full frame is a crop factor of 1.5. So that's actually a multiplier there. So if I have a 50mm times 1.5 is around 75 or something like that. So yeah, that'd be 75.
Anyone who is having trouble picturing this, I believe we have a video that explains this concept.
Totally, yeah.
It's on the if you go to Videomaker in the courses section under lenses. Videographer's Guide to Lenses.
Yeah, I think so.
You can see this visually, what the crop factor does.
Yeah, and the crop factor, all it does is just it changes your focal length. So what's written on your lens is based on if you have a full frame sensor. If you don't have a full frame sensor, you have to multiply that number by the crop factor of the sensor you have.
So that's something that I learned when I bought this Nifty 50 so long ago. The lens was an EF lens.
Yeah.
But my camera was APS-C.
Okay.
It was the Rebel line or something.
Yeah.
So 50 millimeter lens, I put that on there, and suddenly, wow, it feels like everything is like super tight. I had to really back up for everything, and that's because that crop factor came in and it turned it into like a 85 or something.
Yeah, well, that's APS-C as well, so it would have been like 75. That was the same thing I had, but I had an EFS lens that was made for an APS-C size sensor. Yeah. So they have a f4. It's like $300 to $500. I can't remember what it actually is, but that it the same thing, but I was shooting with a 75 all the time, so it was like, man, I love the way this looks, but man, it's hard to frame with this.
Yeah.
And then once you shoot on a full frame of that, you're like, oh, this is amazing to have that extra focal length. And that's one of the things for saving money is buying a lens to the sensor size you have. If you have a small sensored camera, don't buy a lens that goes way outside of the sensor area.
Unless you plan on upgrading your camera in the near future.
True, but like the idea of a micro four thirds camera, if you spend all your money on full frame lenses, you're like double over buying. You're buying more than twice as much glass that you need to. And the nice thing about that is the smaller the sensor, the lower the price for the lens because there's less glass in it. It's smaller. And so because of that, the same performance of a lens for a, say, micro four thirds camera, the same lens is half the price of that, what would be for a full frame. So that's, if you're just getting into lenses and you want a good selection and you don't have a camera yet, that's a great place to be. But most are stuck with whatever lens mount they have. So for us video shooters, we have to choose, what are we shooting with, right? Because there's a whole line of lenses that are cinema lenses, and these are meant for cinema. But if you've ever gone shopping for cinema lenses, I mean, how much are they, Mike? You're like
thousands.
So I remember when I first started working at Videomaker, it was the first time I ever got to shoot on a cinema lens, and it was for our Videographer Guide to Lenses. And I got I think it was a 24 to 70 or something like that. It was a Zeiss, but it was a Cine zoom lens, and its retail price was $25,000. 25 grand. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm shooting this on a $5,000 Ursa Mini Ursa full size, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is such an expensive lens. And was it all that more beautiful of a picture? Not really.
Not 25,000 more anyway.
No, but the things you get from a cinema lens that a still can't offer you is precision. So the idea here is, one, cinema lenses are actually measured by the amount of light that goes through them. So an F number and a T-stop number, F-stop and T-stop number, are related, except for an F-stop is actually something that's just mathematically calculated. It's not based on measurements from the lens. It's what the lens should do. And not only that, but what it should do is a assumption by the manufacturer that is different from manufacturer to manufacturer. So if you set up two cameras at f2.8, you might find one is actually brighter than the other, and it's because of their measurement. Now, a T-stop is the actual light that goes through. So it's measured by the amount of light that actually goes through the lens. So you have a more precise, so if you're going between different lenses, you could stay at, say, T2, and it would be the same through all the different lenses that you swap out for it, and that it has that same consistency. The other is measurable focus distance. So on a cinema lens, it has hard stops where the focus is, and it has measurements of how far away your the focal point is. And so you could get a measuring tape out from a cinema lens and set it at 10 feet, and right at 10 feet, sure as you could be, it's going to be sharp right there. And that's what a cinema lens is going to be able to offer you. So when you put a pull focus on it, the same, you can do muscle memory. You would know I have 7 feet with a, flip of my wrist. So you, as a focus puller, that's why people can actually have a job doing this, is they can get a feeling for the actual lens and know where the stops are. They can also put, hard stops on the follow focus, so it goes between places.
Well, that hard stop on the follow focus or on the lens itself is important, because when you are using a follow focus, you might be setting markers on the follow focus. So like if you have a subject moving through the frame and you need to focus as they move
from point A to point B,
you put a marker on the follow focus at the start point and the stop point, and then someone can actually adjust the focus while the shot's happening without actually looking through the viewfinder and get to point A to point B. But without those hard stops, someone could go a little too far and the ring could keep turning, and then suddenly when you try to go back to those start and stop points, well, now they're not accurate anymore because the ring is like continuing to turn while the focus is not turning.
Yeah, a still lens will continue, the focus ring will just keep on turning. Even after it's gotten to its furthest point of focus. And so say you were doing that focus, you're going, oh, well, cool, it's just going to go to infinity. That's where I need to stop on this lens. Well, your still lens doesn't stop that. So then when it just keeps turning, and so you went a quarter turn past, what now do you have to go 3/4 turn to get back to where you're going?
Right.
You just don't know. And so that's, I mean, I've done pull focuses going, knowing the way they feel, but as soon as it gets touched or moved by another hand, you're going to have to get the feel again. So you're getting a lot with that. A lot of cinema lenses also have like the same filter size, although a lot of times they're being put in a matte box, so you're actually doing square filters or whatnot. Usually they're high blade irises, so you're talking about 9, 11 or more blades in the iris, so the bokeh is always nice and round. And then also in cinema, you find anamorphic lenses. There's no anamorphic still lenses. Anamorphic was something that was actually based around a limitation of film, and that film used to be square, and so they needed to have space for the audio, and they wanted to have a wide aspect ratio, so they used, so they were able to optically make the viewing area a rectangle instead of that square.
So we have a number of different factors here when we're really going back to this root question of like, why are some lenses so much more expensive than others? Just to summarize, it's the part of it is the f-stop, so the amount of light that it can go through, that can come through the camera.
Its lowest f-number is its widest aperture. It's a little counterintuitive. The smaller the number, the bigger the opening. But that smaller that number is, the more expensive your lens is going to be. Even if it changes across the throw of the lens, it's still, that smaller number is a total cost
and then the change of the throw of the lens. So if there's an f range, that means the lowest you're going to get at one focal length is X, and at the lowest you're going to get another focal length is Y. So that range there being like no range, it's the same throughout, means it's going to be more expensive.
Yeah, so like the 24 to 105, it's a f4. Doesn't matter if it's 24 millimeter or 105 millimeter, it's f4.
Yeah.
But they also make that same lens that's an f4 to f7.1, and that means when it's at 24 millimeter, it's f4, and its lowest, so its widest aperture at fully telephoto at 105 is 7.1. So you have that range, and that guarantees to be a cheaper lens. Like you're not going to find a high-end lens that has a changeable aperture until you will. You'll get it at the like crazy long telephoto super duper zooms that are for like bird watching and stuff. That's like 200 to 700 millimeter or something. And at that point, it's just like, yeah, you get what you get because you're looking through like, a foot of glass or some crazy thing. Yep.
There's the sensor size that the lens is built for. So typically, not always, but typically a lenses made for larger sensor cameras tend to be more expensive than lenses made for smaller sensor cameras. They're just like more glass in there.
Yeah, and so and nowadays there is, so like Sony has full frame cameras, but they can also be shot at APS-C, so they can actually accept both their full frame or their lenses that are meant for smaller sensors, but not all cameras can do that.
Yeah.
And so being able to crop, that's great. You get multiple options, and so the smaller the sensor the lens is made for, the cheaper the lens will be. So if it's made for an APS-C sensor, it's going to be cheaper. Now there isn't a huge selection of APS-C only lenses that are high end, because most cameras that are high end are not APS-C size.
Yep. There are other factors in here which we haven't quite discussed. Maybe we can after the break, but autofocus versus no autofocus in the lens. A lot of lenses come with some sort of stabilization inside, electronic stabilization. Some of them have like a pretty sophisticated coating on them.
And optical through magnets keeping stabilization to macro focus, so being able to focus up to something really close. So there's lots of specialty stuff.
A lot of times zoom lenses are more expensive than prime lenses. Not always, but a lot of times they are. Just more. There's more elements, more mechanisms.
There's more to it. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's got to be easier to make something that doesn't move versus something that changes over the mechanics of it. I think it's just a simpler machine.
Yep. And then there's like the whole cinema versus still factor, which, there's cinema. I don't know, Chris. Could you summarize like why it is that cinema camera lenses always seem to be more expensive than still lenses?
Well, there are hardly any, in fact, that are not super robust built. They're usually all very, very stout. They are very precisionally made, and they have things like they don't have focus breathing a lot of times. There are a lot of things that are really high end that are really beneficial to film shooters or video shooters that isn't beneficial to a still shooter. So they're just more they're more technically precisionally built, I guess.
So just to define another term that you threw out there, which is focus breathing. So this is the idea that when something is changing focus, when the lens is changing focus, the framing itself kind of just like adjusts slightly, just almost imperceptibly if you're not looking for it, but it might feel like it's zooming in or zooming out just ever so slightly.
I remember the first time seeing it, I was doing a rack focus from a flower to a biker. And I was in my focus was as close as my focus could be with the lens, and then I rack focused to someone that was about 20 feet away, and I got more field of view because of it. All of a sudden, that focus change made it so you actually got a couple millimeters more of field of view of your image. But cinema, it's those hard stops that are very precise. It's their coating a lot of times, so they're not going to get. Although today there are lenses that are being made to be more trashy looking, not trashy, but
vintage.
More artistically looking. The Sumire cinema lenses from Sumire ones that Canon makes. They're meant to be beautiful when wide open, but they don't look real. They don't say this, and I haven't tried them, but I'd assume that if they're most beautiful if they're wide open, then they just get uglier the more closed up you do. But that they're actually making a lens that has a look to it. A lot of times people use anamorphic lenses just for the sake of the way light bounces off of them and gives you the streaky lines versus a glint that's going to be round that you'd get from just a point of light on a normal lens. But the coating, a lot of times it's the size, so they are all the same distance from the actual mount to the end of the lens. And the reason for that is if you got it in a matte box and you need to change your focal length, you don't have to pull out the matte box. You could just swap out lenses and everything will just clip right back in where it was. Your follow focus will just be able to tilt right in, all those things. And then of course they always have a aperture ring on them. They have a manual aperture ring on them, and it's in T-stops. And
it's smooth. Like a lot of times, Micro Four Thirds cameras will have a aperture ring, but it clicks. It'll click. Each one.
Well, and some like Sony actually offers some lenses that click, or you can make them be smooth, which is pretty cool. And the way I think about it, and if you understand the way brass instruments work, a trumpet and a trombone can play the same notes. But a trumpet has to press down a key to make that note, so there's steps between the different notes, whereas a trombone can slide all the way down to the note and every note in between. Just like our human voice we can hit the wrong note, whereas a trumpet, if they're playing in the key the trumpet's in, there's no wrong notes. It can just play anything. Now, it might not be a pretty melody, but what have you. But that's the same idea with the aperture. So you can change the aperture as you're going in. Maybe you're going from indoors to outdoors or something, or vice versa, that you can do a smooth aperture change based on the same way you would be changing a focus. There's definitely reasons for it. But the nicer thing is that perfect exposure that might be just between two f-stops, you can get it. You can get there. There's no reason to have to choose, a third stop more. You can be between those third stops, so you don't have to change the ISO or the shutter speed. Because really, in cinema, there's hardly any change of ISO or of shutter speed. You're just working aperture, and then you're lighting to make the difference. Now ISO is becoming more flexible, but I mean, definitely not. I used to B, you got a few options, and you just have to accept the amount of grain you got because of turning those open.
Yep. So just maybe a little bit more advice regarding buying lenses, but actually first we should probably take a quick break and come right back. For years, Videomaker has been producing quality video training to help you take your video skills to the next level. Now you can access it all from a Videomaker Plus account. We've got courses covering everything from learning how to navigate your camera with our course on camera controls and settings to learning about color grading or even how to start a video business. Videomaker Plus has something for you. The Videomaker library is split into 4 levels. If you're just starting, try our inexpensive starter level membership, which gets you access to essential video training and a digital subscription to Videomaker magazine. For the most professional training, go all the way up to our professional tier membership, which gives you access to our entire library of training, which covers advanced concepts like running a video business or becoming a documentary filmmaker. Plus, the professional tier is the only membership with access to our popular webinar recordings. Plus, right now, for a limited time, you can get the professional tier of Videomaker Plus for the price of the creative tier. That's $100 savings. Sign up at videomaker.com/springdeal. That's videomaker.com/springdeal. Okay, we're back. So I wanted to give just like one last piece of advice, and let's see, you might disagree with me, which is okay. So I would say to anyone who is, going out there to buy their first lens, like say they are upgrading from shooting video on their mobile phone to now having a dedicated camera, they're getting past the kit lens, to not spend too much money for the most part. I don't know about you, Chris, but I feel like a lot of these little, I say little, but a lot of these features that tend to cause lens prices to go up and up and up yield maybe imperceptible results to beginners. Like they're not going to notice the lens breathing, for example. And in a lot of cases, I think you should just shoot until you kind of learn to see these things before starting to spend money.
Yeah, the thing is there's one, if you're using a lens or a camera that has a lens mount that's been around, so Canon EF or Nikon F, they've been around so long that there's lots of versions of each lens. Yeah. So likely if you're going to buy that brand new lens, it's probably a USM 3. There's a USM 1 out there. Yeah. And the difference is probably the coating and the amount of noise the motors make. I mean, it's probably exactly the same optics. It's usually the kind of things that they end up doing. A new fluoride coating so it doesn't, lens flare is easy or what have you. Or just finding lenses that have been, that are manual that a long time ago, autofocus wasn't even a thing, right? Nothing offered autofocus. So there's lots of vintage lenses out there that have no autofocus, that are fully manual, that have great glass in them and great focal lengths and all the rest out there. And the only issue is trying to find one that's in good shape. Sometimes the classic look of the somewhat scratched up lens is kind of fun, but it's a whole lot better to add that in post. But if you're just learning, this is actually something I recommend doing is if you bought a camera, likely it came with a kit lens, find a focal length. Think of the kind of content you want to make. Say I want to make documentaries. Okay, I'm shooting in Verite format. It's going to be wider. Okay, I'm just going to tape the lens, if it's a zoom, at 24 millimeter, and I'm only going to shoot 24 millimeter. Just get used to what 24 millimeter feels like on your camera. Feel how far away you are to things, because that perception, that internal, is going to go with you. A good shooter is going to be like, okay, I think 50 is going to work well for this. And that's because they've shot and framed that kind of shot before and they know it works. And so it doesn't mean every shot they did before that was good. It just means they know what the right focal length is for it.
It's kind of like the distance from your house to your work helps you to determine how far a mile is or a kilometer, right? So like if you think about, well, how far is 40 miles? Well, a lot of people will just, refer to a distance that they know and then compare it to that. Like, I work 5 miles away from my office. It takes, this much time. And so, and they figure it out like, okay, well, it's about this far. And you can get the same effect with lenses. Yeah. If you shoot nothing but 24 all day long for, 2 months, then you have a pretty good idea of what 50 is going to be like before you even shoot with it.
And the thing is although crop factor is important to make sure that you get the lens that you're trying to achieve with, if you bought a 24 to 105 and you have a APS-C sensor camera, you don't really have a wide angle lens. You're starting at 35 millimeter. That's a pretty normal focal length. So you just got to be aware of that. So that's why there's lots of ranges that are there. But if you get used to shooting at 24, well, tighter is 50, right? Double is tight. You can go from a medium to a tight just that easily, like that. And so it really comes down to like, what are you wanting to spend the most on, and how is it going to help what you're doing? So for me, I remember thinking it was always that low F number, but quite frankly, it was the focal length. I remember shooting in dentist's office and being like, I'm in a room that's 10 by 10 and I need to get a patient that's a medium shot. How do I do this without like standing next to the camera while still being able to look through it? Because of course it didn't have a stationary monitor on it. And, it's just difficult. But if I had, say, a 16 to 35, which is part of the Holy Trinity, which most cameras, we'll talk about that in a second, camera manufacturers offer, that would be a 24 to 75 on a APS-C sensor, that'd be more like on a Micro Four Thirds or something like that, or something like that. But regardless, you want to be able to have that wide angle if you need that wide angle. If you shoot concerts and you want that in the mix look, you're not going to get that with anything but a wide angle. So the question is then, do you start off with zooms or do you start off with primes? And I think the question is, how often do you want to change your lens? And really, what kind of performance are you trying to get? Because honestly, if f4 will do you, man, there's a lot of zooms out there that are affordable. 24 to 105 is like $900 to $1,200, regardless. It's, depending on the brand. So swing at $300, and you'll be able to do just about everything with that lens if f4 will do you. But if you need something more than that, it's going to be, you're going to pay for it. Everything pretty much, any f number below f4 you're going to pay incrementally more for. But when it comes to primes, they're easily faster. They doesn't cost as much to make them because there's not the moving parts. So if you're like, okay, I like a walking around lens. Okay, is there a focal length you just always shoot at? Because I bet you there is. A lot of photographers know you go out shooting with a lens that can do from 5mm to 200mm, and I guarantee you like 90% of your shots are going to be at within 10mm of itself.
Yeah, there's like a range that people will just sort of float between.
Yeah, and it's your aesthetic. It's how you compose a shot. It's, some people think of the wide shot, some people think of the close shot. I mean, like, some people, it make them uncomfortable to think of like shooting an eye really close up, but other people, that's the expression they're going for.
Yeah, and I think some people just like, they're comfortable with their putting their camera up close to people.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and other people are more reserved. They want to hang back and they're going to use a zoom.
Yeah. Or if you're shooting wildlife or airplanes, or, you can't get close to things. So you need a longer telephoto lens. So let's talk about focal length just a little bit. So you have a wide angle lens, and that's from 16mm. Everything below 16 is like fisheye, considered fisheye.
Okay, for skateboard videos.
Yeah, exactly. Going to be great for skateboard videos, elongates everything. From 16 to 35 is your wide angle. 35 is considered normal. But 35 to 50 or so is your normal range, and that's what our eyes see, depending on who you are. But a 35 to 50 is a great, if you're actually shooting at that effective focal length, is a fantastic walking around lens to shoot, events, all sorts of things. You're going to be able to have enough shallow depth of field. You're not going to have to be right up on people, but you don't need to be far away from them either.
It also is, it approximates the human eye in terms of space compression.
Yeah, exactly. You think a normal, like if you think of a shot that you can just see without a camera in your hand, that's a 35 to 50. It's somewhere around there. I'd say probably more in the 35, but and then you go from there is from 50 and above or 55 and above to like say 70. You start to get telephoto, and then you get super telephoto after that. And the thing about lenses in general is the wider the lens, the more exaggerated space is. The longer the lens, the more compressed space is. And that's how the idea of, if you've ever seen a moon at a horizon and it was just ginormous, is because it was shot with a telephoto lens, which brought the background closer to the foreground, so it brought the moon closer to the mountains. And so,
which is an interesting concept, right? Like, how can you really bring the moon any closer? Isn't the relative distance of a a tree on the horizon and the moon and the, millions of miles away, or how far away.
We're creating a mirage with our lens through through optics, right?
Yeah, it's really crazy that it can do that. But yeah, that's always the case. If you ever see like a pine tree next to a giant moon.
Yeah, or the full sun. I remember thinking, man, in Africa, their suns are big. Yeah. Now, given there's a natural telephoto phenomenon that happens at the horizon. So when the moon and things are at the horizon, space compression happens a little bit because of the
way light enters the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's an atmosphere issue, right? And the angle of which or whatever. But still, nothing's going to be big like that big, blood orange moon you saw on the horizon. Mm-hmm. It's like, man, I saw it and it was a speck. I couldn't even get it with my phone. It looks like someone turned their headlights on or something, right? And that's how they do it.
The case. Whenever you try to take a picture of the moon with your phone, it never, ever, ever works.
Or any kind of stars or anything like that.
Yeah, too wide.
So the holy trinity of zoom lenses is to have 3 lenses that cover the full range of necessity, all with the same aperture. So in this case, most of them are a 16 to 35, a 24 to 70, and a 70 to 200, and they're all f 2.8. Now, they're also, you can find these all at f4 most of the time. I think so. 24 to 70 might be actually a harder one to get at f4 just because it tends to be at a 2.8. But that's all. And the thing is there's so many lenses for every mount. Unless it's brand new, there's 5 to 10 different companies that are making lenses for Canon cameras. So you don't have to just buy the manufacturer lenses.
That's right.
And, the benefit you get from the manufacturer lenses is usually a better operation with the functions within that camera, right? Is that they know the technology in it, so the autofocus system might be better and might function better. And I'm saying might because, the same technology can be deconstructed and other brands can go and try doing the same kind of thing, or they find a better way to do it or what have you. But typically that's the kind of benefits you get. And you get things like with Canon's mirrorless, they have added another ring that you can reassign to things and that they're not really opening that lens mount out to third parties. So if any third party lenses are out there, it's because they bought them, deconstructed them, and figured out it wasn't through Canon condoning it in any way. Which is weird because you'll find a lot of camera companies putting mounts on all order stuff. Panasonic has put an EF mount on stuff. Red has got EF on it. Mm-hmm. There's lots of different.
Blackmagic has got
EF, yeah. And a lot of those, of course, Red doesn't make lenses. Neither does Panasonic, though they usually are with Leica. But just things like that tend to work together. But the thing I'd say though is having those 3 lenses. 70 to 200 is I'd say, from $2,100 to $2,600 likely new. 24 to 70 is $2,000, maybe it's $1,700. 16 to 35, same thing. So you're talking about a lot of money. Whereas if you just had a set of 5 primes, you could probably spend way less than that. And you'd have all the focal lengths that you might actually use. And that's why a lot of cinema lenses are primes, because that's how they work. And then when they get to becoming zooms, they're super expensive because they're that same...
and physically massive.
Yeah, physically massive, but they're that same precision. They still are all encased in hard metal, and they all have the same length, and they have that same focus, control and zoom control that is, very specific. So that's really where it goes. But, like a set of primes, you think of still primes, they work really good. Now, the thing is autofocus for most cameras is garbage for video shooters. Now, I think that's changed over the last 2 years. There's actually quite a few that are out there that are acceptable, but for the most part, they're mostly garbage, right? You're not going to be able to depend on them, or they're going to focus on something that you don't want to, and that's because the camera's making the choice and you're not because it didn't do a good job focusing. I mean, there's a lot of that you can do tracking, and you can do eye tracking and all sorts of stuff, which works really well. But the thing about the autofocus is that it could just choose something else to be on, but it's got to be nails if you're going to use it, and that's cool. But if you have a really active subject, it's really difficult to follow their focus. And in fact, a lot of times, if you turn off the autofocus, you'll realize, oh, they're actually not moving closer or further away from me. I don't have to worry about that, and that's not even something I need to pay for. A lot of times for me, I'm controlling what I shoot, so it makes a lot of sense.
So something that we haven't quite talked about is the optical effects that sometimes pop into lenses. Well, not sometimes, they often do. So one is bokeh. We said use the word bokeh a number of times now. And for anyone who's never heard this word or just doesn't know what it means, it's basically like, when things go out of focus, like way out of focus, the hot spots have these shapes that just sort of bloom out.
Yeah, bokeh is the quality of the defocus. It's all the stuff out of focus. It's how pleasing is that out of focus. Like you can see on Mike's shot, although if you're listening to this, you're not going to get to see it. He's got some pretty nice bokeh. There's not a lot of, even the straight lines have soft edges and everything. And so, some nice bokeh. And that's because of its exposure. I'm not sure if it's from the lens or not.
You see this most in if you see a shot that's got like string lights in the background.
Totally. Christmas lights make, you'll just see the nice little circle. And if that circle is oval, it's likely a cheaper lens that shot it. Or if it's really a weird shape, it's anamorphic. But what it is, and this is really cool because you can actually do this. In fact, Saturday Night Live has done this on some of their cutaways, is you can make a shape of an aperture, put it on the lens, and then all of the light points will make that shape. So they actually did it with SNL. So all of the little twinkling lights said SNL, and it looked totally like a visual effects. But no, it's just a party trick of making an aperture the shape of what they wanted to make it.
So oval is no good, or sort of really bendy is
or
no good.
Or like a stop sign looking.
Yeah. So oftentimes stop sign, or you can see edges. Let's see, a stop sign has how many? Eight edges?
Or six.
6 edges? So you'll see these bokeh shapes with 6 edges or 8 edges or 9 edges or 12 edges, or sometimes, like you said, when there's so many blades, it'll be a nice round circle.
Round circle. And the other part of the way you can see it is the bokeh might be circle, or it might be, it's oblong, so it's actually round, and then there's this little part that peeks out. And that's not enough. And usually if those little spots look funny, it's because the lens is cheaper. Yeah. And it's typical telltale sign of that. But you could take the most beautiful shot with the cheapest lens. It's about having good composition. There's all sorts of things that come into play that, you could give me the nicest lens in the world and I could give you junk. Or you give me the nicest lens in the world or the cheapest lens in the world and I can give you, beautiful, beautiful shots. It's all about really what you do with it and if it's the right tool for the job. So, we were talking about for zooms, there's all sorts of cool zooms that are out there. Like, in fact, they're becoming more, like some of these are blending together, like they're 16 to 70. Or like that idea of 24 to 105, that's going a little bit past 70. So you have a 105 is a great lens to shoot like a portrait or do like an interview because it's doing a good amount of space compression. So it's flattening features of the face. So, bigger, your forehead won't look as big, your nose won't look as big, your lips won't look as big of your subject. And not the person shooting the camera. You're going to be ugly no matter what. So that's a really great thing to have. I know for a lot of portrait shooters, they'll shoot a 70 to 200 because of that reason. Is a lot of times being able to compress that space will make someone more beautiful because of that. It's not elongating features. It's flattening them instead. But for the idea of a set of primes for shooting, you'll need a wide. So a 24, I'd probably do like a something that is in it really depends because, a fisheye isn't going to be beneficial to most people. It's going to be a waste of money. They're not going to use it very often, but when you need it, there's nothing that's going to work better. But what you get at those, you get lens aberrations. So you start getting distortion when you get to wide angle lenses because you either get a convex or what's the other word? Concave bending of straight lines because of the edge of the lens, because of the distortion created by the widening of the field of view of the actual lens.
So there's a few types of lens aberrations. So one, I think the one you're describing is when like elements in the image appear stretched or sometimes doubled, I guess.
Or they can go blurry or that kind of stuff. That's mostly that's distortion from the bend of the lens, from the optics bending straight things.
There's and sometimes those can look nice. I think there's maybe an artistic element here that some people like to take advantage of.
If you're shooting a wide angle lens, you got to accept these.
Yeah.
So you're just hoping you're not getting chromatic aberrations.
Chromatic aberrations is the nasty one.
And that's the bad one because that's where color separates. So like you'll never get anything sharp because the colors separate at edges.
Now I noticed this when I shot with my Nifty 50, my original $100 one. You get it in, and it looks okay when you're looking on the back of the camera in the LCD. And you get into the computer and you look in and you're kind of zooming in on details, and now you're seeing the edges have like color shifting.
Yeah.
You'll see the edge of a skin tone with like a red outline around it or a greenish outline.
Yeah, and
that's those chromatic aberrations.
Yeah, and it's no good. I mean, once you have that, and I mean,
there is correction now, and
there is for photos.
Yeah,
for
right.
video,
different story.
Well, there is correction for video. It's just going to be like a denoiser. It's a very, very resource laden processing.
Yep.
So like it's not something you're going to slap on and just have fixed. But like, really with GoPros, I mean, there's distortion correction for GoPros built into just about every editor. I mean, you just choose Hero 4's wide, cool, and it straightens up your lines for you. But usually you'll lose a little bit of the field of view. It'll end up having to be a little tighter. And then of course, if there is any of those chromatic aberrations, you're done for. And I see a lot of more that from like crummy sensors. I mean, you're getting it from the lens, but if you're getting chromatic aberrations optically, there's probably just something wrong with the lens.
Like misaligned elements or something.
At the TV station, we had 3 different Nifty 50s, and the reason why we ended up replacing them, not because they didn't look good, is because the focus ring would just get stuck, and then you couldn't change it anymore. And it was like, just because it was just this cheap plastic thing, I'm amazed that the lenses were actually glass. But for 50 or 60 bucks or whenever we were buying it for it beat the socks off for buying one $1,500 lens. So, we could get $100 from here every once in a while, but not so much. It really depends. But the bokeh thing, I think, is people get hung up on, is your bokeh beautiful? And I think that's all about what you're trying to achieve. I hardly ever shoot something where the bokeh is so, I'm shooting something that you're going to see the twinkle. That's something for a lot of still photographers that's going to benefit. But for video,
well, you might if you're a wedding videographer, shooting really low light circumstances.
It's beautiful to do, but it's more of a specialty tool of having these big bokeh. You're not going to shoot everything with just a ton of bokeh behind because it's going to be distracting. You're going to have this big old giant light source twinkling when you want to look at your subject, throwing the bouquet or whatever. Yeah. But that beautiful shot of, all the lights flickering and that mooding shot or that establishing shot or what have you, that special moment shot totally makes a lot of sense. So we have on our list best lens mounts. And
is there a best? Is that such a thing?
I would say there's ones I would recommend.
We should do,
depending on where you are.
We should do crummiest lens mounts, right? Like they're really the ones to avoid.
Yeah, I honestly all of the mirrorless APS-C that Canon offers, so the M6, M50, they have their own lenses, and they just don't have a huge selection for them. And those cameras are a little bit cheaper. I'd much rather buy a camera that I could. Maybe it accepted the bigger mirrorless lens mount, and then I could do it now. I just complained about Nikon doing that, but that it would be nice that at least you could use those lenses on it. It at least gives you that option. Really worst. I think
it's really kind of personal preference, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people will complain about Micro Four Thirds because they tend to go on smaller sensor cameras. That's not really a problem with the lenses, though. That's just like the sensor type. Yeah,
and it's the sensor side. The I want a full frame. Full frame is not really beneficial to a video shooter, unless they have the lenses that match up with it, and you're actually taking advantage of what you're getting out of those more lenses, the more pixels or whatnot. Because, on a Micro Four Thirds sensor, full pixel readout, unless you're shooting 8K on a full frame sensor, what more are you getting? You're just getting a bigger sensor that buy more glass for.
Yeah.
I recommend for people, if you're like, I want to get a nice video camera, I want to be able to have a nice lens selection, and I want the camera to perform well, I'd say go Micro Four Thirds, because the lenses are half the price, and a high-end one, a nice lens, is going to be affordable. It's going to be right where all of the cheaper lenses for everything else. I mean, you can buy primes for a Micro Four Thirds that are really great for $300. You can buy, a super awesome equivalent of a 24 to 70, which would be a 12 to 35 f2.8 for $1,000 instead of the $2,200 for the same thing and the same quality. Olympus makes some amazing Micro Four Thirds lenses that I really like. They look really nice. They are high performance. They actually have a focus ring that you can snap in for autofocus and snap out if you want to focus manually. So it's not a switch; it's just right there on the lens. They usually actually have hard stops on the focus, which is kind of cool too. It's just not a hard thing to add those things to those lenses. So that's a great place to be. But otherwise, is it the best lens mount though? The best lens mount, I mean, it's so funny because I don't think people are choosing their camera based on the lens mount, which is, I mean, I guess maybe they are.
I mean, if you ask me, they should probably be.
They
doing
should
that.
be, yeah. But it's bigger picture usually. I think there's other specs that people choose. Like, I wanted to have up to this frame rate before they're thinking about the frame.
I think that might be just a bit short-sighted, unless you're talking about pros, and pros can change their system more frequently.
Yeah.
But if you need a certain frame rate, or you want a certain frame rate, you could still get a camera that doesn't have it, and it's going to come eventually. These camera companies are just always playing catch up and leapfrogging each other, and that's just stuff comes with time.
And they're trying to offer you stuff and marketing it to you so you think you need it.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us because we don't cover used equipment. So it's like we don't have our best camera buyer's guide isn't full of models you can't buy anymore. And so, it's hard because I don't necessarily recommend buying used equipment. So if you can't buy it new anymore, it's hard to recommend it for us, because when you're buying a used piece of electronic equipment, it's it could be just fine, or the guy could have shot with it at one of those color bomb parades, and
color runs,
and everything on the inside is completely covered in dust, and you just can't see it, and you buy it, and then the thing doesn't do 5 shutters before the shutter gets hung up. I mean, there's just a lot of unknowns when it comes to buying electronics.
Did we do an episode on buying used gear?
I think
we had a segment on it or something.
No, I think we did a whole thing on if you should, and I think we qualified of what kind of used stuff are you buying? Used something that you can count something on, or you can inspect. Sure, buy it. But if some things are a higher risk than the reward of getting just a better price on something. But lens mounts, everybody's pushing their mirrorless mounts, and I think that there's a lot of cool technology that's going to come out of that, like smaller f numbers, so that knocked lens that was a 0.9, it can be a really sharp lens. The idea that, like, for Canon, them bringing their lens mount closer made it so they could actually organize the lenses in the lens itself backwards. So the lens that used to be first is now last, and so it's changed some of the performance of their lenses. So they're able to use the same technology they did, but because they reorder the elements, that they can get different, more performance out of them. And it's definitely easier to have autofocus on a mirrorless camera, because typically the camera is processing to show you the image, so it can use that processing to analyze the image and do some better autofocus than, say, a DSLR, which is really never going to do anything super good. Although, the Canon 1DX Mark II, Mark III are just some fantastic autofocus.
So we didn't really answer the question of what's the best, so I'm just going to say it. It's got to be EF, right?
Well,
it's the most ubiquitous one. That's the Canon lens mount type EF, Works on basically any Canon camera outside of the EOS M cameras.
And you can still get an adapter for that.
Yep. It's on Blackmagic cameras. It's on Red cameras.
And there's an adapter for just about every mirrorless camera to accept it.
There's an adapter to put it on the R line.
It could be on the R. It could be on the Sony Alpha line. It could be on the Panasonic. You could put it on a Micro Four Thirds camera because it's big enough.
Yeah.
And there's just so many of them. I mean, so many of them. If you want to get a really nice quality lens, there's just a ton of Canon EF out there, and enough that, like we're saying, there's other camera manufacturers that are putting EF as the mount because they know it's easier to get those.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of them out there.
When you're talking about like cinema lenses, unless you're talking about PL, which is, I don't think we've ever covered a camera with a PL mount, other than you could get a Blackmagic camera with it on it, but the actual...
Didn't we get a Canon C300 maybe? C300 you can get with a PL mount.
Yeah.
Maybe the one that we got was a EF.
Yeah, I haven't really dabbled into PL because we haven't covered... Because that's a little bit high. That's a $10,000 or more. But, right under that, just about every cinema option is also available in EF. Yeah. Like Zeiss, although Zeiss makes a mount for just about every camera now, but unless you're talking about some of the older cinema lenses, EF is this bare minimum. Just the difference you're going to get is you're going to have an adapter. I know on Sony cameras, the E mount with an adapter and a heavy EF lens on it is going to wreck the mount after a while. So making sure you give it support, or you mount the camera by by your converter or by the lens, so that you're not putting the weight on the lens. But I'm not a big adapter fan, except for like the idea of Canon EF on a Canon mirrorless, because they make really cool mounts with the ND filter built in.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Which I think is really rad. But like if you're putting a lens on a camera that's not meant to be there, I think you're just going to be adding some damage to it.
Well, unless you're talking about a speed booster or something, right?
Yeah, with speed, you're doing that, but you're still pulling out the weight from the mount, so the center of gravity of that lens is out.
Physical damage. Yeah, I guess that's true.
That's everybody I know.
But you're also gaining there. You're gaining the not only the quality of the lens, but particularly actually gaining light.
Yeah, stop of light if you so need it. And the thing is it's like, will they work good? Yes. Will they work good for a while? Yes. But like the extra performance you get probably kills some of its life. Like it's a trade-off, like almost everything. You're not going to buy the best thing for the best price and have it last forever. If we did that, then we wouldn't have cameras to review. But I think that EF is really the most ubiquitous. Although I would say that Micro Four Thirds is my favorite mount, for the sake of it always pleases me to go, I can get that for that. Oh, like it excites me. Like if I was going to buy a camera tomorrow, and I wanted to have every lens focal length I could think of to shoot with, I'd buy a Micro Four Thirds camera because I could do it all for half the price.
That's quite an endorsement.
But it wouldn't be a Panasonic. It'd be some other Micro Four Thirds. They'd buy Olympus or something. I don't know. I don't think so. It'd probably be a GH5.
Okay, well maybe we'll call it there, hey?
Well, we didn't talk about stabilization or anything like that.
We kind of mentioned stabilization, and one of the many factors that causes lenses to be more expensive, I guess, right?
Well, and if you're shooting with a camera that doesn't have a sensor stabilization, it's the only place you're going to get it. Yeah. And for shooting video...
No, that's not true. There's also the external stabilization of your hands, or a gimbal.
A gimbal and those kinds of things. But directly from the camera, optical image stabilization is necessary if you don't have it other ways. So it's something worth paying for. Is it as good as sensor stabilization? Not typically. Is it better than digital stabilization? Absolutely, every time, regardless of how you do it in camera or wherever digital stabilization is just not so good. So it is one of those things you pay for. Yep. And macro is just one of those. So it's a specialty thing. Just
we didn't get into
pan tilt or
macro or specialty lenses. Macro. Tilt shift, all the crazy lenses that like Lens Baby makes.
Yeah, all those, and those are all specialty stuff. Yeah. It's all things like you have a reason, or those new ones that have a really long snoot, so you can go into
those
things.
Those are so rad.
Yeah, they're really cool. I
gotta get one of those in.
We do. I don't really know the subject matter that they work really great for, except for if you're going in through something. I guess I don't know. It just gives access to that into something. You couldn't shoot in a tube otherwise.
Those lenses?
They have a special name.
long. I'm just going to Google long skinny lens.
Well, the thing I'm excited about though is that anamorphic is becoming more affordable. So like with Micro Four Thirds cameras, GH5 has anamorphic support, and so we're going to start seeing anamorphic in affordable ways, just because it's their specialty. But I think people that are into filming, like it's something that people will be willing to invest in.
Probe lens.
Probe.
Wow, what a great name.
My friend Brandon Vetter was just asking me about one the other day. He's like, I
really wanted to play with one of these.
I'm like, I saw one and I did a little like push in at the booth at NAB 2 years ago, but it was like just on my way. I'm like, what's this? And I'm like, oh, look at that. I could like go in, and it was like a meal that they had like all around it. I was like, oh, that's neat. And then I just kept on walking because the applications are very small, but it would be fun to have or what have you.
All right. Okay, well, maybe we'll call it there then, eh?
It sounds good.
There's probably a lot more to talk about regarding lenses. I guess we got to do lenses part 2 sometime, huh?
Yeah. But for video shooters, don't fret. And the cool thing is, we actually have lots and lots of articles on lenses. So if you have any questions, we have lots of availability there. And then if you become a Plus member, you can watch the full course on lenses. And man, we go into the weeds for an hour. I guess we went through the hour this time, but that was scripted
there's actual
hour.
visuals for that. Yeah, and it's scripted.
Scripted hours,
we had
like
to go
5
through
hours
all of the
this.
details in a podcast. Yeah, it'd take forever. Yeah. But yeah, so we have the lens buyer's guide up right now. And as Chris mentioned earlier in the podcast, we got more coming. So
we even have a
specific buyer's guides.
Vintage lens article and just everything explained.
I think those ones are super interesting.
It is. It's like I just think the fun of like having to go and like hunt for something as well as get it. It's kind of fun. That's why I like old cars. It's like the hunt for the car is a little bit almost more fun than owning it.
When side note, do you remember digital Bolex?
Oh yeah.
So we got a digital Bolex here at Videomaker, a review unit, and they sent it with no lenses. And it was a strange mount. It was like B mount or something maybe. Huh. And so we had to like dig up some old lenses, and I don't remember where we ended up getting them from, like a pawn shop or something maybe. But man, it was some interesting footage. I really liked it.
Yeah. If you could just go for the effect, it's cool. That is fun. I just would have a hard time being cemented into an effect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, those old lenses, it's really for hobbyists, right?
Yeah.
Or a pro who's got a very specific project, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's that you could have a hobby on the side of buying old vintage glass and use it from time to time, but it would be kind of like you collect it to put on your shelf. It looks neat. And then some of them are neat for some things, but most of them are probably just look neat or were a cheaper way to get there.
That's making me think I might want to try to pick up some vintage Micro Four Thirds lenses. And do we still have a GH5 around here?
We have GH5S.
Yeah, take that out for a spin.
And
some vintage glass.
And the adapters for those things it's like a small little flange. They're really cheap. I think you can buy them for like $18 or something.
Okay, so after 2 false starts, we'll call it there.
Yeah.
So, thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thanks to everyone for listening. For Chris Monlux and everyone here at Videomaker, I'm Mike Wilhelm, and you've been listening to the Videomaker Podcast. We'll catch you next time.